Now it's recording.
I
There you go.
press that red button on the thing.
Okay, so there should be a sign-in sheet coming around that's got 3 columns on it. You know, period 2, period 3, period 7. Make sure you write your name on that. That should be coming around again. If you need to get up and check that, that's okay. I checked through the test, and there actually was one thing that I said in class today that wasn't correct. That is, there is a section with matching in it, but there's only 10 matching sections, or 10 matching questions. And that has to do with chapter 15 mostly, 15 and 16. So Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft, migration, suburbs, that kind of stuff that was just on the test that we took. So there's a matching section about that. But again, most of it is multiple choice. So format-wise, there's 10 matching questions. Then you have from number 100 to 130 is multiple choice in groups of 4. Most of that, I don't know if I'd say most of it. There's probably about half identification, just basic factual stuff, like who came up with conflict theory? And the answer is Karl Marx, right? So there's no like application really there, it's just there's a clear right answer. But then there are also some application questions in that section as well, okay? 4 options, multiple choice with 4 options. Then from number 130 to 160-ish, something like that, 130 to 160, it's a section where it's going to ask you to identify whether something is one of these 4 perspectives. Conflict theory, functionalism, symbolic interaction, and then social exchange theory. So, what I would do in that section, first of all, is I would figure out, is it micro or macro? If it's macro, you know it's functionalism or conflict theory, right? If it's micro, you know that it's symbolic interactionism or social exchange theory. So let's just do a brief summary of those theories, and then I'll give you some quotes and we'll kind of apply them, okay? So, functionalism, also known as the structural functional approach. Some of the main guys that addressed that were Durkheim, Talcott Parsons also. They basically tried to figure out what the purpose of social institutions or social organizations are. So everything in society, whether it's the family, and when they say family, when functionalists say family, they don't mean like my family or your family, they mean like all of our families together and how we work, right? Like think of it like the heart. The heart has a whole bunch of cells that are inside of it, right? There's heart cells, brain's got brain cells, all that. So when they say the family is like the brain, and then all of our families are like the brain cells. Does that make sense in their analogy? So, the functionalist approach is a macro level approach that says that every social institution or organization has a purpose or a function. So it tries to analyze why stuff happens regarding those functions or those purposes. Some of the theories that are related to that, again, we talked before about manifest and latent functions. Manifest functions are the intended consequence of like the family or education or college or mass media or whatever, okay? Latent functions are the unintended consequences. And then you also have social dysfunctions. Social dysfunctions are things that promote instability or lead to instability in society, okay? So that's functionalism in a nutshell. Conflict theory was developed primarily by Karl Marx, kind of merged out of the Communist Manifesto, which was a book that he wrote with Frederick Engels in 1848. So communism basically is like a political and economic system that is an expression of conflict theory, the social theory, the sociological theory, okay? So conflict theory is also a macro theory. It's gonna say that like the big structures in society, like the government, like the school system, like the criminal justice system, the police force, all that stuff, they exist because they're expressions of power where the people that have power basically want to keep the other people down, keep the other people out of power. Okay, so that's conflict theory in a nutshell. Symbolic interactionism, one of the main SI theorists was George Herbert Mead. Another guy that came up with the concept of the looking glass self. is related to SI theory. That guy's name is Charles Horton Cooley, C.H. Cooley. And then dramaturgy is kind of a subset of SI theory. Dramaturgy, Goffman was the theorist that came up with dramaturgy, okay? So SI now is a micro level perspective, so they're gonna focus on smaller groups. Now, to draw this distinction, it's not just two people. If a person wanted to understand like how this review session is working, this would be a micro perspective, even though there's, 25 people here, right? So micro again is more of a smaller focus, macro is more of a bigger focus. So now the key thing with SI, or the symbolic interactionist approach, is they believe that the whole world is an exchange of symbols, okay? Or I don't know if I want to use the word exchange because that might mess people up with social exchange theory. But it's all about like when we communicate, when we interact with each other, we are basically doing so through this lens of culture and our beliefs and our perspectives and how we interpret situations. So words like interpretation, interaction, symbols obviously, perception, feelings, beliefs, those things are generally tied to the SI theory. Okay, and then the last theory, social exchange theory, is also a micro perspective. I don't think there's any questions about the people with exchange theory. Probably the main exchange theorist you'll hear about is a guy named Peter Blau, B-L-A-U, but like you don't have to worry about that, the name. I'm 99.999% positive that that's not on there. But anyways, what exchange theory is, again, is it's a micro perspective, so it's seeking to try to understand what happens in society because of individuals' choices and actions. And what exchange theory basically holds is that everybody, when they're evaluating what they want to do, when they're evaluating relationships, when they're evaluating whether to be in a sport or go to a movie or whatever, they kind of subconsciously, sometimes consciously, sometimes they actually write it down, but they subconsciously like weigh out the pros and the cons of that situation, and then that's going to shape how they choose to respond. So raise your hand if you played The Sims ever. Okay, in The Sims, basically when you play The Sims, when people interact, they actually have like point values that people get more, and if your characters get high enough and it's a boy and a girl, then they'll like fall in love and start making out and get married and stuff, right? Okay, that's exchange theory basically. So there's a guy that wrote a book called His Needs, Her Needs. Willard Hartley is his name. He's a psychologist out of the cities. It's a very popular relationship book. We talked about that a little bit in class. He basically says that everybody kind of does that in relationships. So they kind of, if they're getting their needs met, then they're happy in the relationship. If they're meeting the needs of the partner, they're happy in the relationship also. So his concept, he calls it a love bank, is basically applied social exchange theory. Okay? So those are the theories in a nutshell. Let me give you some examples. I'll like give you the example and then I'll have you talk to the person next to you about which one you think it is for like 10 seconds and then we'll discuss it, okay? So in the section on the test, again, where it has a quote or a song lyric, or maybe like a passage from like a Buddhist text. There's a couple quotes from Buddha in here. There's a quote from the Bible also. You have to try to figure out which of the theories does it match the most, okay? So let me give you an example, and I'll literally read something off the test verbatim, just so that you guys can kind of see where I'm going, and then I won't read that many more verbatim off of that. But let me just give you an example for the first one, okay? So, here's the first question in that section. Homosexuals experience difficulties in the United States because conservatives and others oppress them. Okay? So now you would have to identify which theory that matches. I'll say it again and then I want you to talk for 10 seconds to explain why. Okay? Homosexuals experience difficulties in the US because conservatives and others oppress them. Okay? Talk to the person next to you, which theory do you think applies and why? Okay. Who's got an idea? What's the answer? Conflict. Why? like, what's the key word probably, or the key couple words that help you understand that it's conflict? Because that's the right answer.
Difficulties.
Okay,
Oppress.
difficulties, oppress, because that's a power thing, right? If you oppress somebody, you kind of take advantage of them unfairly. And then homosexuals, plural. If it were to say something about like a single homosexual guy that is interacting with somebody else and he feels bad and it's focused on like one or two people, then you know it's not macro, it's got to be micro, okay? So that's an exact statement from the test again. You'll get quotes like that where you have to try to apply them, okay? So let me give you a couple other examples, and then I want you to do the same thing. I'll give you the example. These I'm just gonna make up. I'm not gonna give you any more word for word off the test, but they'll be similar in concept to what is discussed, okay? The government creates laws against monopolies because it helps the consumers in that society, okay? Government creates laws against monopolies because it helps consumers in that society. Which theory? Discuss. Okay, who thinks they have a, let's start this way first, macro or micro?
Macro.
Macro. Government creates laws in the society, that's pretty big, right? Pretty broad. Okay, so we know since it's macro, it has to be functionalism or conflict theory. Now, is it functionalism or conflict theory then?
Functionalism.
Functionalism, okay? The government creates laws to protect consumers in a society, and then it's kind of implied because then it'll help stuff to work better, right? Okay? Next one. Okay, does everybody sign this? Good to go, thank you. Okay, next one. What the school does for society, what the school or the education system does for society isn't really important. What matters is how individuals feel about education. Okay? Which theory? Okay, who has an example or who thinks they know what it is? Symbolic interaction is correct. Okay, notice how in that question it said, what education does is not important for society. So it's saying macro is not important, right? What matters is how individuals, like you and you and you and you, how you feel or how you interpret education. Okay, makes sense? All right, next one. Just use Grant's right there, I'm gonna use him as an example. Are you or are you not currently dating anybody in this classroom?
Not.
Okay, good. All right. Grant decides to break up with Jordan because he thinks that a different girl brings more things to the table to a potential relationship. Okay, which theory? Figured I'd ask that first before.
Yeah.
I should have asked if you ever have dated that. Did I tell you a story about how I did that bad one time?
Hey, Grant, you should have been like, yeah, like
I
three
want
of
to hear
them.
it.
One time it was in world history. These are two people that graduated last year, so I'm not gonna say who it was, but I can't remember exactly what the analogy was, but I'm like, imagine that this person dated this person, and some of you would know who they were, okay? And I'm like, and then this didn't work out, so you didn't like the person, and people are like giggling and looking down, and then somebody in front, I was like, they used to date. It ended ugly. I'm like, oh. So, actually, I remember how it started. The guy kept like tapping the girl on the shoulder and kind of messing with her, and I said, well, you know, if he keeps picking on you, it means he wants to go out with you. And everybody kind of went, oh. I'm like, what? It's true. And then that's when he used to date came up. So, but here's a good example, okay? Let's use another example now. Michael looks at, maybe I should ask you the same question now. No girlfriends? Okay. So Michael looks at Madeline, and then he waves at her and says, hey, how are you? And she smiles back and says, good. And Michael's like, I'm golden. She likes me because she smiled at me. But Madeline is like, I'm just being nice and saying hi to him. Okay? Which theory would help us to understand kind of the confusion that they have there. Discuss. Okay, what's the answer there?
SI.
SI. Okay, why? It's a small group first, it's micro, and then they're interpreting the actions differently, right? Michael sees Madeline like be nice, smile, whatever, he's like, she likes me. Okay, and then Madeline is like, I'm just a nice girl, I'm waving, saying hello. Okay? Guys are generally really bad at picking that stuff up, if you haven't figured that out yet. Okay? Alright, next one. You decide to take a job because you believe that job brings more to the table for you individually. Like, benefits you more individually. Okay? Talk to the person next to you. Which one? Okay, which one?
Gita Hadonovan.
Social exchange theory, right? It's micro, and it's about trying to weigh the pros and cons. Okay? So now I'm going to give you an actual quote from the other section. So there's like 15 questions where it's just general statements like that I kind of made up. That you could see like an SI theorist or a functionalist might argue that position, okay? It's a statement that basically logically follows the theory. Now, in the second half of that section, it's an actual historical quote or a song lyric or like a proverb from Confucius. There's actually a couple. Confucius is one. Confucian ones, I should say. There's a couple quotes from like the early presidents, people that signed the Declaration of Independence. But I'll give you one from Siddhartha Gautama, okay? So this is what it says exactly. In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds, and they believe them to be true. In the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and believe them to be true. Okay, talk to the person next to you, which theory and why.
Yeah, I'm gonna get this word for word.
Okay, what theory? First of all, micro or macro? Micro, their own minds, right? Okay. And then, would it be SI or exchange? SI. They create distinctions, right? It's all about the social construction of reality. That's kind of like the Thomas theorem, right? And then they believe them to be true. What's perceived as real is real and its consequences. Okay? Let me give you some other examples. I'm not going to read them to you word for word, but let's just say that an early US president says that the main purpose of the government is to defend its people. Which theory? Talk to the person next to you. Okay, which one?
I got that word for word.
Functionalism, purpose, function, government, macro.
I think I
Okay.
have that word.
All right. So I'm going to end that section for now. Again, I think generally you guys got it, right? But you should practice this a lot. Like, think of some of the songs that we analyzed in class. Think of some things that you hear. If you see it's like a song that's about how a certain group is oppressed or picked on, whether it's African Americans or women or whatever, probably that's going to be conflict theory, right? But you also have to answer that micro or macro. If you see a lyric or a song lyric or a quote that says something about this is what teachers are supposed to do, or this is what dads are supposed to do, or whatever, if they're supposed to do something, that's their function or their purpose, right? So it's probably functionalism. If it's talking about beliefs, values of individuals, their interpretations, it's probably going to be SI. If it's talking about individuals weighing the pros and cons or trading something or bargaining, like, hey, I'll give you this if you give me that, whatever, probably exchange theory, okay? All right, so let's talk about just some general things then. Let me give you a couple people, and then I want you to tell me some of the key things they did, okay? So I'll tell you the name, you talk to the person next to you a little bit, and we'll go from there. Weber, Max Weber. Discuss. What did he do?
To be honest with you, Darth Vader. Wow. I think I made a connection or something.
Okay, Weber did what? Probably the big thing he's known for, if you remember, is chapter 5, bureaucracies, elements of a bureaucracy, problems of a bureaucracy. He talked about that quite a bit. Okay, Karl Marx. Discuss.
You wrote the Communist Manifesto.
Okay, two things with Marx. Communist Manifesto, main theorist for what theory? Conflict theory. Okay, Auguste Comte, C-O-M-T-E. What did he do? Anybody know? He's the first guy to use the term sociology. Okay? Emil Durkheim. Durkheim.
Anatomy?
What's up?
Like anatomy? Or
Anami, normlessness. He talked about that. Durkheim also studied religion in Europe, the Protestant ethic. And then he was one of the earliest theorists we used to discuss social integration and how it relates to a specific behavior. You remember what behavior that was? Suicide. Yep. So Durkheim studied some of that. It was all about social integration, remember? The more connections you had, the less likely you were to try to commit suicide. Okay? All right. What are some manifest functions of education? Shout them out.
Make students ready for society.
Okay, get people ready to be citizens. Get people ready to be in college or in a job.
Problem solving.
Okay, problem solving. Kind of perpetuate the democracy, right? What are some latent functions of education then? Anybody, just say it.
socialization?
No, socialization would be a manifest function of education. They want to socialize kids, right? You go to a kindergarten, they're like, stand in line, say please, right? That's all part of socialization. So what's a latent function of education?
Childcare.
Childcare, right? School's shut down for the day because the weather's bad or something. Parents have to figure out what to do to take care of their kids. What's another major one the text talked about? Yeah, you meet your friends, you meet your boyfriend or girlfriend at school. You go to college, a lot of people meet the people they married at college also. So it's the matchmaker element. Good. Okay. What's the term for a framework for building theory that sees society as an arena of inequality that generates conflict and change? What's the answer for that? What theory is that?
Conflict theory.
Conflict theory. Good. Okay, what are the... Oh, we talked about that. I don't need to go over that. Okay. What's a weakness of functionalism? What's a weakness of functionalism?
Like it looks like it, I don't know how to put it into words, but like they think bad things are okay sometimes. Because like they look at crime and they say it's part of society and it keeps society functioning.
Yeah, remember how when we were on deviance, it talked about how deviance was functional. Some people argued that because it helps us to clarify what's right or wrong, and it helps to kind of unite people together. So functionalists will argue that some bad stuff is actually good. The Davis-Moore thesis, we talked about that before, right? It says that people have to get paid a different amount of money so that society can attract people to jobs that are harder. So to be a surgeon, a lot of skills, a lot of pressure, a lot of risk, you have to go to school forever. Functionalists would say it's good that they get paid way, way more than other people because we want to attract smart, driven people to those positions. Okay? You want to shut the door? Thanks. Okay? Conflict theorists would say it's bad to have such a distinction between the rich and the poor because it leads to a bunch of conflict, inequality, oppression, all that stuff. Okay? So, functionalists in a way are, they think social institutions are generally good. Conflict theorists think that social institutions are generally bad. Okay? Give me an example of one of the 5 main elements, I almost said elephants. 5 main elements of culture. Five main elements of culture. Language.
I'm gonna go with values.
Values. Beliefs. Symbols. And the last one is the term for standards of behavior. Norms. Okay. Now with norms, there's 2 types of norms. What are the stronger of the 2? Mores. What's the weaker of the 2?
Folkways.
Folkways. How do you tell the difference? You see somebody violate a norm, how do you tell whether that norm they violated is a more or a folkway?
By how bad whatever they did was.
By how people react. Yep. The stronger the reaction, the classic example I often give and the text gives is, at least in the United States, you offer your left hand to shake with somebody, they're going to look at you like, what are you doing? It's kind of weird, but they're not going to be offended. In some cultures, that's viewed as offensive because that hand is reserved for wiping yourself when you go to the bathroom, and extending that hand to somebody would be like saying, I want you to touch crap, basically. Okay, it's symbolic of that at least. Okay? All right. Let's see. What is the theory that says that culture and individuals' thinking is shaped by language very heavily?
What?
The theory that says that language shapes culture and life. So like, an example of that would be like Flannery and Mapes, maybe somebody else, and Schultheis, maybe somebody else I'm missing, know more about dance than others because they're involved in it and they know all the words. Like,
Here in the building, report to 124G, 124G. Thank you.
if you were in the building, report to them. So do we all have to go there? Is that what she means? But, so anyways, you guys do some of your stuff, like you jump and then, do the splits and touch your feet, or you stand on your foot and you like spin, and then mentally I'm like, oh, they're standing on their feet and they're spinning. But you guys have terms specifically for that stuff, right? Okay, so you can think more deeply about it, you value it more and you understand it more than other people, not just because you're involved with it, but because you know the language. Okay, what theory says that? Let's call it, well, it's actually a hypothesis, but the blank hypothesis.
Sapir-Whorf.
Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is correct. Yeah, why didn't you just say it?
I don't know.
He whispered it to Tony like 3 times.
Like,
Maybe you
It was
just really like
collective.
whispering to Tony or something, right? Maybe?
I don't know.
Okay. What's the theory that says that what's perceived as real is real and its consequences?
Thomas theorem.
Thomas theorem or W.I. Thomas theorem? Good. How about the one that tries to seek to understand life by the analogy of a play and we're like all actors? So we're like front stage,
Dramaturgy.
backstage, dramaturgy. Good. Okay. What's the collective term for the ways of thinking, acting, and the material objects that shape a person's or a group of people's life? Physical artifacts, beliefs, values, norms, all that together forms what? Language? Culture is correct. Okay? What's the term for a subgroup within a culture that really tries to challenge the norms and values of that culture? A subgroup within a culture that tries to challenge the norms and values of a culture.
Outgroup.
What? What did you say? I'm sorry.
Out-group?
No, not out-group. It's a counterculture, okay? How about like you, next week your dad gets a great job in a different town, decides that it's like a long ways away, and you end up moving to Alaska. Okay, you show up there, very different place. For the first couple weeks you're gonna walk around really confused. What's that state of confusion you're experiencing?
Culture shock.
Culture shock, okay? How about the instances of culture changing slower in some ways than others? What's that called? Cultural lag, yep. So an example of that is like when they invented automobiles, right away they didn't have like a rules of the road book they could hand out to people. When the internet was invented, they didn't have a bunch of laws about cyberbullying, right? So they had to kind of figure out things as they went. So that's cultural lag, okay? How about this? Give me an example. I'll have you talk to the person next to you briefly again. Give me an example of high culture and pop culture. Example of high culture and pop culture. Okay, Brianna, example. Either one, doesn't matter.
High culture would be something like really expensive, like, I don't know, people like dresses people were wearing at like the Golden Globes or something.
Okay, it's something that represents the elite of a society. Pop culture then is?
Me?
Yep.
Something that's more common, like most people just have iPhones or something like that.
Yeah, popular. Okay, so Gucci or whatever, I don't even know, clothing or handbags or whatever, high culture, whatever regular clothes like Wrangler jeans or whatever is just kind of common, that'd be pop culture. Okay? All right. What are the 3 ways that culture can change? One involves bringing stuff in from a different culture. One involves finding out about stuff that actually already is there. And then the last one involves creating new things. What are they? Invention, discovery, and diffusion. Good. So, if I go to Japan, I think this is the example I used at the last review session, bring back a whole bunch of comics from Japan, or when Japan closed its borders for a long time historically. When they opened them up again, the ambassadors actually brought in a whole bunch of stuff from different places. They wanted to like industrialize very rapidly. That's diffusion, okay? If you start to get into something that's been in a culture for a long time, that's discovery. If you invent something new, obviously it's invention, okay? What is the term for the lifelong experiences that we have that help us to develop? The process of developing throughout our lifetime. What is that? We're doing a lot of this in my household right now. It occurs throughout your whole lifetime, but we're like, remember Natalie, when you meet somebody, what do you say? Hi, my name's Natalie. What's your name? Nice to meet you. Okay, we're doing a lot of that.
Do you say it exactly like that too?
Yeah.
I gotta say it like
Probably, yeah. Yeah, we practice a lot. So, but what am I trying to do? I'm trying to teach my daughter, but what's the broad term for that? Socialize her, yeah, socialization. Good. Okay, Freudian concept of personality, remember? Id, ego, superego. What's the basic drives that demand gratification? Basic selfish drives that everybody has. What is that called?
Id.
The id. So that's the devil, and it's not a perfect analogy, but that's the devil. Your conscience that gets incorporated from society. Which one's that? Ego or superego? Nobody wants to be wrong. Superego is like the angel. That's your conscience. And then you in the middle trying to figure things out is the ego. Okay, a lot of that has to do with the debate of nature versus nurture, right? Are people basically good or are they basically evil? In a Freudian perspective, they would say people are basically evil. At your core, the id wants instant gratification, doesn't care if other people get hurt. So like when my son, he's a year and a half, his birthday's in May, if he doesn't get what he wants, he's going through like a biting phase now. So he'll like walk up behind you and he'll try to bite you. Okay? And that's kind of dangerous because of how tall he is. Like he's just tall enough that it's like a little bit taller and he's gonna bite me right in the rear end all the time. Okay? So I like literally have like bite marks on my upper hamstring on the back from my son. Because I'll be like, I'm trying to load the dishwasher and he's like trying to pull things out and I'll like box him out, like basketball, you know? And then he'll bite me like right under my butt, okay? To a Freudian, that's an expression of the id, okay? You look at little kids, like if they were bigger and like not so small and more like athletic and stuff like that, they probably would kill each other sometimes. Like when they were upset about toys, and if their parents couldn't get involved and they were bigger, little kids probably would kill each other, right? So, no, I'm serious, don't you think? Like as angry as they get? So, that's the Freudian argument, okay? So now nature, nurture, which one has to do with what's biologically pre-programmed? Nature or nurture? Which one's about biology? Nature. Which one's about how you're raised? Nurture, okay? Another theorist with socialization was a guy named Jean Piaget. He focused on cognition and how people develop through different stages. A lot of these are stage-based models. Freud had a stage-based model that we didn't talk about too much, but if you take psychology, we will. So with Piaget, if you remember, he had the sensory motor, the pre-operational, the concrete, and the formal. In which of those stages did people respond to stimulus in their environment? Which one do people respond to stimulus in their environment? Concrete, formal, sensory motor, or pre-operational? Sensory motor, like the experience through their senses, they respond to it, okay? Which one do they first use language and other symbols? Pre-operational. So you'll see questions where it'll set up that scenario and you have to identify, okay, which one goes on? Okay, we also talked about the 4 main agents of socialization. Mass media, peers, school, and what's the last one? Let's think about what institutions help to socialize people. Family's the other one, okay? We had a little discussion, debate about that. One of our assignments had to do with it, okay? So, learning that helps you to get to a social position you want. So college students that come and watch me and then later they become a student teacher, or kids in their backyard like playing baseball or shooting baskets, whatever, until they eventually can be like a varsity basketball player. Little kids dancing in front of the mirror until they can dance later, whatever. What type of socialization is that? It's where you model the behavior of somebody that you want to be like later, and that helps you to kind of get ready for it. What do you remember? Huh?
Copycat?
Well, the process is called modeling, but as it relates to socialization, there's a specific term. It's called anticipatory socialization. What's it called if you get put to a total institution? So that's like prison or mental hospital. If you get to a total institution, they want to change you. What type of socialization is that?
Rehabilitation.
What? It's not it's something. No. It's just re-socialization. Okay, re-socialization. So in total institutions, prison, mental hospital, drug treatment, all that stuff, they first want to break down what you were doing before, right? I'm a thug, I'm a criminal, whatever. We want to end that, and then what do they want to do? They just want to leave you without that, or what do they want to do?
They want to make you like a contributing member to society.
Yeah, so they want to give you a new identity, basically. What's your identity in? Okay, another theorist we talked about was Lawrence Kohlberg. If you remember, Kohlberg had pre-conventional, conventional, and post-conventional, right? What do those have to do with? What do those have to do with? Okay, I'll give you a clue. Pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. Pre-conventional is based on feelings, like stimulus, feelings. If it feels good, do it. Conventional is based on rules. Post-conventional is based on values. So, what does that have to do with? What's the core assumption? What are they trying to analyze? Somebody's got to help me with this one. Emily, what are they trying to analyze?
So like actions in society, like what you do?
That's true, but focused on what? If it's feelings, and then rules, and then values, what is that all discussing?
Well, like what you do, like if it feels good, that would be, and you do it, then it would be like very conventional, and then like if you follow the rules when you do something, then it's like conventional, and then like if it's like not necessarily like breaks the rules, but like it's like morally right, you do it, that's post-conventional.
Yeah, so she said morality, right? Standards of right or wrong. Okay, so Kohlberg's focus is on morality. Another person that studied with Kohlberg was a lady named Carol Gilligan, and she looked at boys and girls, right? So what was the key distinction that she found? When it comes to morality, how do girls tend to define morality and how do boys tend to define it? I think I gave this example, like, so I play a lot of softball in the summers. I've seen people almost get in a fight over a call at first base in a game where it's like 9-3. It's the second game of the season. The score is literally 9-3. It's like in the 7th inning. And I've seen people literally get in a fight because they thought there was a bad call.
Rules,
Yeah, because
So-
the guys are so focused on the rules, right?
conventional.
Yep. And then when girls are, again, in general, what are they more focused on than the rules?
Post-conventional.
Feelings. Like how's that going to make people feel? I even see this a little bit. Obviously, I haven't done a random sample, and I think part of it's because of like the building trades class and some of the shop classes tend to be dominated by guys, but my classes tend to have a lot of girls in them, right? But like when we do the project, there's a lot of guys that if they think somebody did something or didn't do part of the project they were supposed to, the guys are like, this is bull crap, you need to do this. That's what you're supposed to do, right? Some of the girls are like, well, we don't really want to be the bad guy here, but we want to, you know, they're kind of walking around that issue a little bit. That's basically the distinction that Gilligan is talking about. Okay. What is the term for the theory that says that you believe about yourself what you perceive or what you think others perceive about you? What's that called?
It's like something like a mirror, right?
Yeah.
Looking glass self.
Looking glass self, yep. What's the most important thing in terms of socializing a child? Is it like having a good school, having a lot of money, having friends? What is it?
Isn't it like socialization, like with like someone nurturing like early in life or something?
Yeah, who specifically though?
Parent.
Family, yep. So gifts, we talked about this and kind of debated it a lot, right? Put a kid in the absolute best family you can and have them go to a pretty bad school and have friends that are kind of idiots too. That's better than having a kid that has a really, really messed up family, but their school's pretty good. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of research that addresses that. Give me a couple examples of a total institution again.
Prison.
Prison, jail,
Mental hospital.
mental hospital, stuff like that. Okay, let's talk about the concepts of statuses and role now. What's a social position you hold? Shout it out if you know the answer. Status. What's the expected behavior that's tied to a social position?
Role.
Okay, the role. So, I have a bunch of statuses right now, like husband, father, teacher, college student. I'm still working on my thesis, I probably will be forever. Actually, I'll get it done because I have a deadline approaching now. But So what are those things collectively called? Teacher, student,
Status set.
guitar player, whatever, status set. Okay, good. So now as a teacher, I have a variety of different expected behaviors. Grade keeper, motivator, content expert, whatever. What's that called?
Roll set.
Role set. What, now to me, I kind of have a tier, like I think about this stuff a lot, like am I investing too much time in certain areas of my life? The status that I believe should be the most important to me, or the one that shapes my life the most, what would that be called?
Mastery.
Master status, okay? Now let me give you a couple of statuses that a lot of people have, and I want you to tell me if it's achieved or ascribed. Male, ascribed. College graduate, achieved. Boyfriend, widow, ascribed.
Oh, achieved.
Unless you killed your spouse, yeah.
Would that be like with marriage too? Because
Yep.
some countries like the dad's trade. So.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're in like Saudi Arabia or some Middle Eastern societies, being a wife, and not males usually have some power in deciding, right? But being a wife could be either way.
They pay like a dowry, right?
Yeah, so the women don't have a lot of power in that situation. It's probably gonna be an ascribed status in many instances. Okay? So you guys get that concept? What's it called when, like, your job, so a lot of you are in athletics and stuff, your job of being a student, or your status of being a student gets in the way of you being a hockey player, dancer, or whatever else.
Status conflict.
Strange.
Yeah, you don't use the term status in there, it's role. If it's a single status, it's strain. If it's
Conflict.
multiple, it's conflict. Okay, so dancer, student, that's two different ones. That's conflict. Okay? Me as a parent, like my daughter, 98% of the time, super sweet. Okay? Sometimes, horrible. She's crabby and I tell her she has to quit watching Doozers. So has anybody seen Doozers? Or My Little Pony or something? She's like, I'm not done. She's like pushing me away and trying to steal the controller, like the remote, you know? So she's like screaming at me. So I love my daughter and obviously I want her to be happy, but I also have to discipline, right? So sometimes there's a disconnect there. So that would be an example of role strain because it's both tied to the status of being a father. Okay? All right. I just gave a whole bunch of those. Okay, what's the key in understanding humor? We did a day on that where I had a bunch of clips and you had to identify if it was funny or not. How funny was it? What do you have to understand humor?
How far outside of the norm it is?
Yeah, the differences between reality that are being presented. So you have to know like the details, otherwise you can't get the joke. Okay, let's talk about the Milgram study and then also Solomon Asch. They were studying group dynamics and how they shape people's behavior. In the Milgram study, what went down there? Like the shock study. So Milgram wanted to figure out how much pressure from an authority figure would shape people's behavior. So, and what did he find? Were people willing to go along and shock people? It was pretend shocks, but were they willing to do that? Quite a bit in quite a ways, yep. Okay, how about the Asch study, Solomon Asch? I'll give you a clue. Remember that? I had a couple slides up about it. In the Solomon Asch, and it's also in the text. In that study, he had a whole bunch of people come in, and then he'd quiz people, which line is the longest? Or which line matches this other line? And then he'd modify the scenarios, like have more people, have it be all girls, have it be all guys, have other people work along with people, change a bunch of things. But people would like go against obvious evidence because they didn't want to like offend others or didn't want to appear weird, right? So if we were to repeat this study and I were to say which was the longest line, clearly the second one's the longest one, right? But I would like tell everybody else to say that the third one is the longest one, and then we get to like Morgan, and we try to see like, is she gonna go against everybody else that has said that it's not that one, or is she gonna conform? So that's what that study was about, okay? Also look at problems of bureaucracy and elements of bureaucracy. In the text, there's a couple sections on that. It talks about like formal written communication. That's an element of a bureaucracy. Rules and regulations, specialization. So you look at a school, we have a bunch of rules and regulations in the program of studies, in the planner, all that stuff. We have rules and regulations to set up what's going on. Teachers specialize, the cooks specialize. Those are all examples of those things. But also there's some elements of problems in a bureaucracy as well. So if people like start programs in a bureaucracy and those programs don't want to go away, that's called bureaucratic inertia. If people just keep doing the same thing because they've always done it, what is that called? What problem of a bureaucracy would that be? Talk to the person next to you, what do you think it would be? That would be ritualism. Ritualism. Okay, what type of group is it if you're focused on like getting stuff done? What type of group is that? Or what type of leadership is being exhibited in that group? If the focus is on getting stuff done. That's called instrumental group or instrumental leadership. What's it called if you're focused on the well-being of group members?
Expressive.
Expressive, exactly. That's pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward. Okay, we talked about sexuality and manifest and latent functions of some of that as it relates to like birth control and prostitution. So check that out a little bit. What are some of the social changes that we've experienced where in the past it was like if people misbehaved, it was because they were bad, but now it's because they have a mental problem? What is that concept called? Medicalization of deviance. Good. Okay, let me give you an example of something. I want you to tell me if it's a crime against property, crime against a person, or a victimless crime. Okay? You ready? Downloading music illegally. Yep, most people would consider that a victimless crime because there's no clear apparent victim, right? How about assault? Crime against a person. Okay, vandalism. Crime against property. Wire fraud. You like steal money from somebody. Probably crimes against property. But how about murder? Real obvious one. I'm trying to think of something that's like, trying to think of a debatable one. Murder. Not a victimless crime, right? So crimes against a person. So be able to identify some of those. We also talked about Hershey's control theory as it relates to deviance. With Hershey's control theory, you need to have consequences for deviance, and those consequences have to be severe enough. The likelihood that people are going to get caught has to be fairly high. And the time between when they get caught and the punishment has to be pretty swift. So you have those three things together. What helps to control deviance is not so much the punishment themselves, it's people being worried about getting punished. So you're sitting in class and you're like, I really should cheat on this test. But mentally you think about it, well, if I get caught, I'm gonna fail this test and then probably fail the class, and my mom would be really mad at me, my coach might find out, whatever. Your whole mental argument you have in your head about that relates to Hershey's control theory. So you imagine the consequences, it makes it less likely that you'll do it, okay? What is a label that people get that changes their self-concept and social identity? A stigma, good. Okay, we also talked about Merton's strain theory. Remember that was the 4 boxes that talked about basically what people do related to like the goals of a society and the expected ways to reach those goals. Okay? So, if you accept the conventional means, like you follow what most people do to accomplish the goal, but you don't really care about the goal that much itself, what would you call that? There's a table, you guys remember that, right?
Yeah, it's like-
okay,
yeah,
so
there's
look up that
boxes.
table and check it out. That would be ritualism, okay? What if you accept the goal, but you disagree and use like different means?
Innovation.
Innovation. So one of my RAs in college, so really smart guy. This is back when they still did this on a large scale. But what he did was he installed these programs that would pay you for browsing online, and then every so often these surveys would pop up and you'd have to like click here to continue. He was a computer science major. He wrote programs that would do that automatically for you. So that's why now when you fill in a lot of those things, you see like an image and it's like all blurry and looks weird and you have to write like the letters. It's like WFL1. Has anybody seen something like that on a website? They want to make sure you're not a robot. So my RA, Ryan, he wanted to make money. I don't know if he stayed in college or not. He actually gambles online for a living now. But most people can't do that, okay? But, so anyways, that's what he does. But he wrote all these programs that would do those surveys for him automatically, and they'd pay you like a couple dollars an hour to surf online, maybe $1 an hour. And then he cloned his machines, like wrote programs that would duplicate his IP address in his browser. So he had like 8 computers running 24/7 in his room that would do this all the time. Wrote the programs on it, whatever. He'd get a check in the mail like once a week for like $500-600 just for running those computers, okay? What would that be? Genius, yeah. Innovation. He rejected the traditional means of like getting a job and working for the money, but he wanted to get the money still. ATF actually showed up at his house though. Alcohol, tobacco, and firearms with like shields, like Call of Duty style, and the thing that busts the door down with guns drawn and stuff. Because he had all this money coming in from overseas, and they thought it was like a terrorist. Like the Patriot Act flagged him as like, you're getting all this money from overseas, these companies are overseas, you're probably a terrorist. So him and his wife were sitting in there, fiance at the time, Maggie, and they're watching TV, boom, door busts open, ATF, get down, you know what I mean? So,
He's like, I'm just watching Cops.
yeah. But they stole all his, or they didn't steal all his stuff, they seized all his stuff and froze his bank accounts and stuff, he had to get a lawyer, and it was kind of scary, but.
Did you get a lot of money for gambling though?
Oh yeah, he made.
So
he
did
made
you
a
like
lot.
win? Did you like win that?
What?
Or like you didn't get in trouble then for that, like being a terrorist and stuff?
No, he wasn't a terrorist. He's from Minot, man.
Well, like where you like. won,
He's
like,
not yelling like Allah Akbar as he's
No, but like-
shooting people in Paris
So
or
like,
something.
yeah, he just got
Yeah.
everything back.
What's up?
He just got everything back then.
I think he got most of it back. Yeah. So I haven't talked to him in years, but I just remember him talking about that. He was great. But the funny thing is, like, so he is so super smart. If he just would have like took his classes and like learned how to code and went and worked for Microsoft, he probably would have made a ton of money anyways. You know what I mean?
But this is a lot more fun.
I don't know. But good guy though. I mean, I don't think anything he did was illegal. So
Do you go to work in your pajamas? Because he does.
no. No, that's true. But I'm such a people person though. That would drive me nuts. Like getting up in the morning and like I really like interacting with people.
He doesn't even have to get up in the morning.
Yeah.
He's
But-
sleep till noon.
He's got to run. So now he plays poker online, and the style that he does is kind of risky. But So he has big swings in his bank accounts, but when he wins a lot, but he might lose like $20,000 in a week. So, like, that's why the average person can't, like, I'm prefacing this now, don't go home and start gambling online, because I gave you an example of somebody that does it. Bad, okay? But innovation from strain theory perspective would be an example of what he's doing, okay? All right. What's it called if you can change social positions? Move up or move down?
Social ladder. Something like this.
Mobility. Social mobility, okay?
It is a ladder.
If it's like, I started out lower class and then my kids end up upper class, what's that called? Inter. If you yourself start out poor and then you end up wealthy, intra, okay? So I saw in the paper yesterday, retired teacher and principal in New York won the state Mega Millions jackpot there. It was the biggest jackpot ever awarded. $330 million, something like that. He went from being probably middle class or upper middle class to being like very upper class very quickly, right? So that'd be intra-generational. Okay, what's the difference between absolute and relative poverty?
Relative is like in relation to like somebody else, like compared to other people,
Yep. And then absolute is
like threatening.
life-threatening. Good. Okay. Where is most absolute poverty concentrated? What continent? Africa. Okay. Northern or southern hemisphere, which one's more wealthy? Northern. Yep. Okay, we also talked about dependency theory. Was one of the explanations as to why people were poor. Which overall sociological theory is related to dependency theory the most? No. Exchange and SI are both micro. This is like larger scale. Dependency is conflict theory, okay? Let's see. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to try to skip some of the stuff I think is really obvious. Okay, well, let me do a few of these. I'm going to give you an example of something. I want you to tell me if it's white collar, pink color, or blue color. Okay? White, pink, or blue? Welder.
Blue.
Blue collar. Dental hygienist. Kindergarten teacher. Truck driver. Teacher. White collar. Teacher, white collar. Okay. Now let's do the same thing. Primary, secondary, tertiary. Sectors of the economy. Farmer. Primary. Car salesman. Tertiary. Rancher. Primary. Factory worker. Secondary. Okay? What's the term for segregation that just exists? Is it de facto or de jure?
De jure.
No.
De facto.
De facto. Jure means like law.
50% chance.
Yep, 50-50. What's the difference between discrimination and prejudice?
Discrimination is the action.
Prejudice is a thought.
Prejudice is a belief. Discrimination is an action. Okay, how about prejudice and stereotype?
Prejudice is negative, stereotype can be negative or positive.
Yep, prejudice is negative. Stereotype can be positive or negative. Okay? So we did presentations today. If you say Asians are smart and you believe all Asians are smart, what's that? Stereotype. If you say, example, like rednecks are racist.
Prejudice.
Prejudice. If you believe all rednecks are racist, prejudice. Okay? What is unequal treatment of people in order to increase diversity or improve past wrongs?
Affirmative action.
Affirmative action. Good. Let's see. That's pretty straightforward. We've got about 10 more questions. What are the two main types of economic systems we talked about? Capitalism and socialism. Which one limits personal choice but creates more equality? Socialism. Which one produces a lot more overall? Capitalism. Okay? Straightforward, straightforward. Okay. What's the increased emphasis on taking religious beliefs literally across the world? What's that called? Well, religiosity is a general measure of how strongly somebody's religious beliefs are, but fundamentalism would be the answer, like taking religious beliefs more seriously, okay? Is that just in some areas of the world, or is that happening everywhere? It's happening everywhere, actually.
What was that term again?
Wait,
Fundamentalism.
Can you read what it was again?
It's taking religious beliefs more literally, fundamentalism. Okay, 3 types of authority. Let me give you an example, and I want you to tell me which one it is. Authority based on law, rational legal, based on like what has happened over the course of history. Traditional, based on the qualities of the person or the group. Charismatic. Okay, so be able to identify some of those. Okay, what's being married to one person called? Monogamy, many. Polygamy. In the instances of polygamy, is it more common for women to have multiple husbands or the other way around?
Other way around.
Other way around.
Is
Okay.
that like Indian guy or whatever? They have like East and West.
Nigerian. Yep.
Whatever it was.
Okay, let me give you some examples of religious behaviors. I want you to tell me what the term would be for them, okay? So, taking the pilgrimage to Mecca in Islam, the Hajj, baptism, communion, meditating in Buddhism and Hinduism, what would those be examples of? Rituals. Yep. What's it called if you have a social system that's based totally on effort and deservedness? Meritocracy. What if it is based just on how you were born? Caste system. What if it's a mix of the two? Class system. Okay. Which part of an age-sex pyramid is the biggest? Bottom or top? Yeah. So bottom's going to be bigger if you take the bottom half than the taller, because the higher you get, more people die, right? So poor countries, do they tend to be like more leveled off, or do they tend to be more like this? More like this. Yep. Okay, what's a type of movement that seeks to, a type of social movement that seeks to radically change specific people? Remember, we also had a little square that analyzes those. So if it's changed people a little bit, like Sanford Power Center, they're not taking like 400 pounds, it's not like The Biggest Loser, right? They're taking people that are already athletes and trying to make them like better athletes. What type of social movement would that be? Alternative, right? Biggest Loser, redemptive. Small group of people, a lot of change. What's it called if they want to change a lot of people but just a little bit?
Reformative.
Reformative, change everybody and change everybody a lot. Revolutionary, so be able to apply some of those also. Okay. Okay, that's it pretty much. I skipped some of them that I think are pretty straightforward because we were getting a little long here. If you have questions specifically, email me, I'll help you out. Make sure again you signed up on the sheet if you didn't. All right, you guys pass. Okay. Hey Tony, can you hit stop on that? Just close it, close the side, and then